Hey, Tom, we might need to hit start webinar there for the attendees to be let in.
Totally agree. I'm trying to find it while I have the screen shared.
Do you want me to just click it for you?
Sure. It doesn't appear to be on this Linux version.
All set.
Hello, I'm Eric Matisik, co-chair of Denver Startup Week. Last year, we were able to bring the global audience together for Denver Startup Week, and this year, we're excited to welcome that global audience back as we celebrate and showcase the best of entrepreneurship that the Denver ecosystem in Colorado has to offer. In Denver and beyond, there are lots to explore this week, but most importantly, we're excited that you're joining us. We have nearly 50 sponsor companies who contribute to make Denver Startup Week possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our headquarters and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors whose leadership makes this week come to life, Capital One Cafe, the Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork, and our track sponsors who've made all the great content you're hearing today possible, which includes our founder track sponsor, Kickstart, our growth track sponsor, Friday Health Plans, developer track sponsor, Quizlet, product track sponsor, Palantir, design track sponsor, Battery 621 and the Public Works, people track sponsor Exactly, and the spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing this excitement to the entire week. Thank you to B-Side Fund, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pi Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and the VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our sponsors and member sponsors who are listed on the screen, and thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now, let's get to it.
Hello, Denver. We are so excited to be here. We're excited to tell you a bit more about the Foundry for Builders program and to be a part of the Denver startup ecosystem. We moved our headquarters to Denver in the last year, and we're excited to call Denver home. Foundry for Builders, essentially we're offering our end-to-end Foundry solution that is deployed to major governments and enterprises worldwide to early and growth stage companies so that they can build their business on Foundry from day one.
Hi everyone, welcome to Denver Startup Week. My name is Ryan Margolis, and I'm the Product Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At DSW, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, or sexual orientation. A special thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us to keep DSW free and accessible for all. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week.
All right, well, I think our sponsor video is done, so I think it's ours. Just want to say thank you to all of our attendees. We are super excited to talk to you today about technical storytelling. Big thank you as well to Denver Startup Week and all of the sponsors that make this possible. As I mentioned, we're super excited to talk about technical storytelling. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm Ellen Williams, and I'm the VP of Business Development at Exum Instruments. And I'm also happy to be in attendance with my panelists. That is Matt Bell and Dawn Putney. And so Matt Bell is the co-founder at Strategic Peace, and he helps B2B companies deliver information-driven customer experiences, and he's got great expertise ranging from executive level positions at growth stage oil and gas companies to investment experiences through both Shell Technology Ventures as well as being an angel investor. So you're really going to enjoy hearing from him. And then Don Putney, who is the spiritual cheerleader at Toolbox Creative. That's a company that is a brand strategy and creative agency focused on high tech industries. And she has over 30 years of marketing professional experience in both large ad agencies, as well as her smaller one here in Colorado. And she has a passion for turning tech speak into market share. So I know you guys are going to really enjoy hearing from these panelists. What we're going to do is I'm going to give a brief introduction about this topic and why it means so much to me. I'm going to hand it over to Matt and Don, who have some prepared remarks as well. But we aren't going to talk at you the entire time. We definitely want this to be interactive. We want you guys to be active in the chat. Please put in your questions in either the chat or the Q&A, and I will be monitoring that so that we can get your questions answered. Because we aren't just going to focus on why your new tech won't sell itself. We also want to give you some frameworks and some tools so that you can effectively sell it. So to start out with, just a little bit about me. So as I mentioned, technical storytelling is kind of personal for me because this is my professional brand. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I say technical storyteller in my headline. This is something I came up with a few years ago, because I noticed that storytelling was a very common topic in business. I would see this in articles in the Harvard Business Review. I actually took a course on Coursera called Storytelling and Influencing that was put on by a business school. So the business world has recognized the importance of storytelling, that facts and figures alone do not get you success in business and with management. But then when we're talking about these very highly technical startups or technical industries, there is a technical aspect to that storytelling as well. And often it's kind of acting as a translator almost between these highly technical concepts, these highly technical teams, and the less technical investors or managers or decision makers that you tend to communicate with. So I have an engineering background. I held several engineering positions in my early career. In fact, you can see me in my first career as a field engineer, my hard hat and steel-toed boots. But I found through each of these roles, I was always the one who was client-facing. I was always the one explaining the benefits or the value of these technical projects. For example, you can see me up in that top picture presenting at an international hydraulic fracturing conference. And so I started to explore the various business roles as well, combining this technical aspect with this business and storytelling aspect. And that has led me to this VP of Business Development position at Exum. And Exum is a Denver-based startup. We are developing a new scientific instrument for analyzing any solid material. So take anything from a rock to a piece of metal, get the full periodic table of what's inside it. So obviously that's a highly technical product, but something that I have to explain and tell a story about that does not just get into the technical weeds. And then the other cool thing about being in business development is that I now work remotely for the company in Durango. So that final picture you can see is my husband and me finishing the Colorado Trail last summer in the midst of the pandemic. And after living in Denver for 7.5 years, we decided to make the move to Durango in late last year. So enough about me. I'm going to, of course, tell a story in order to talk about the value of storytelling for technical products. And this is actually a story from when I was in college, and it was a lesson that I learned then and something that I think about often in my career. So as I mentioned, I studied engineering, and my sophomore year, I did an Engineers Without Borders project. And maybe you're not familiar with Engineers Without Borders, maybe you've heard of Doctors Without Borders. Well, it's the same concept, but rather than going to other countries and doing medical work, we went to other countries and did engineering projects. So we were going down to Huamansanya, Peru, which is a small village on the western side of Peru, just at the foot of the Andes Mountains. And we were going to build more efficient biomass stoves. So in case you aren't familiar, a lot of the developing world still cooks on just biomass or just wood burning stoves, even in their homes. And so many of us are in Colorado. We like going out camping. When there's not fire restrictions, we like having campfires. Imagine having that in your kitchen for those 3 meals a day. So every time we would walk into the kitchen when they were cooking on these open trench fire stoves, your eyes just immediately tear up. There's soot all along the walls in the kitchen. Obviously, if you're breathing that in 3 meals a day, that's not going to be healthy for you. And you're spending a lot of time walking around collecting wood for all of those fires. And that has an environmental impact as well. So what we were going to do is build these, design and build these improved biomass stoves. So we spent all year long doing research on other projects that had happened in other countries, designing combustion chambers so that we could maximize the amount of heat that we could get out of a small amount of wood. And we were pretty excited. And you can see us there on the left side of the screen. We've got this prototype built where we've gone down to Peru already. We're working in a schoolhouse, and we found some local materials. We're testing our design. And then on the right side of the screen, you can see us actually implementing one of these stoves in one of the villagers' homes. So you can see there's a nice chimney to bring that smoke out of the kitchen. Once we finish with the brickwork, then we actually put a metal plate on top to, again, just keep all of that heat and all of that smoke inside. And then, of course, that designed combustion chamber so that you end up using less wood for the same amount of energy. So we engineers, we think, man, this is going to speak for itself. The fact that you no longer have smoke in your house, the fact that you're using less wood, clearly this is just a better stove. So we ended up building maybe 10 to 15 of these in the 4 weeks that we were there. But did we really succeed? Well, I can tell you that after implementing the first one of these stoves, we wanted to be there for the very first meal cooked on it. So we're standing there with Doña Elena, and she's lit the fire. You know, we had our notepads out. I think we even had a temperature gun measuring the heat of that plate as the fire starts to heat up. You know, typical engineers being very nerdy, pointing out that, you know, now there's no smoke in your house, and isn't this wonderful? And all she can realize is this is taking longer to boil water than it used to. And some of the other comments that we got were, this isn't how my mother did it. So no, we did not succeed. We failed to communicate the value of these new stoves, these brand new things that we were putting into these homes and just forcing people to change their lifestyle. And we failed to communicate the value of it by thinking that it was just going to speak for itself. And so how many times have you seen this? How many times have you seen a technical founder or just a technical professional getting into the weeds about how cool their product is without relating to their audience and really explaining the value of what it could mean to them? And so I'm just going to end with a framework that I like to use and that has resonated with me before I hand it over to Matt to really get into some more details about this concept. But building a story brand based on the book of based on Donald Miller's book is a good way to think about this, to avoid the mistakes that we made when we were college engineers. This concept, if you like reading, I suggest getting the book, but you can also just go to mystorybrand.com and you can actually work through kind of an online worksheet with these concepts. But essentially, selling your story brand and selling your technical product is just like any story that you've ever heard, any movie, any book, because every book, every story, every movie has a main character. They have a problem. They'll meet a guide, get a plan, call to action. Ultimately, it ends in a success and they avoid failure. So let's think about Star Wars, for example. We've got Luke Skywalker as the main character. He's got the villain of the dark side. Yoda is his guide. He gets his plan, learn how to be a Jedi, and then ultimately it ends in a success where he defeats the dark side and avoids any sort of failure. And you can kind of sum this up as a character transformation from something to something else. And now the really important point that I want to leave you with here is that you are not the main character and your brand is not the main character. You are the guide. Your customer is the main character. And this was something that we missed when we were college engineers. We thought we were the heroes. We had done all of this engineering work. We were going to do this great job of implementing these improved stoves. We should have thought differently and realized that we were just the guides and that the main characters and the heroes of the story should have been the villagers. So hopefully this gives you a little bit to think about in terms of your brand and your product, your company. And now I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who is going to talk about crafting your company's message.
Let me unmute myself and not make the most basic Zoom mistake of the day. Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate the introduction. Appreciate Denver Startup Week, as you said, and obviously everybody in the room with us today, virtually. So I'm going to flip straight into these slides, if I can get them to advance. So I'm going to focus a little bit on how to go about crafting your company's message. I think, as Ellen said, we could wax lyrical for a while about why it doesn't work, but I think what hopefully will be more valuable to the audience is to think a little bit about how we go about making a successful message. So I'm going to dive into that, and I will do my very best to keep this down to about 10 or 12 minutes, although we're going to cover a lot of stuff very quickly. Get to the rest of it in the Q&A. Very briefly about me, Ellen introduced me there as I, like her, began life as an engineer. I'm an Imperial College graduate out of London. And I moved through a major oil company, wound up in the corporate venture capital group, and that gave me a springboard into early stage business, both whilst I was there as a VC, looking at it from an investor and a board perspective, and then later on as I left to join one of those businesses and ended up running and growing 3 different businesses in my, I'll call my corporate management phase of my career. And through that time, I realized that the thing that I'm probably most passionate about is the messaging and the branding. How do we convey what this business is to the customer in order to grow it? And so firsthand experience crafting and delivering those messages now for several dozens of companies as I've moved into the, let's say, the consultancy phase of my life and focusing increasingly on messaging and the framework that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. As Ellen said, the customer is really the target here, right? It's not about us, the business, it's about the customer. And when communication works well, we know it, especially in the consumer space. So we've all had that experience where we're thinking about buying something, we're not really quite sure, we start an online search, we find some helpful information. That helps us put a frame around what we're looking for, learn more about what separates good solutions from bad solutions, move through that evaluation process, end up making a purchase, hopefully in a sort of seamless, personalized fashion. Then we receive the product or the service, we implement it, we like it, and we go on to renew or upgrade or buy more. And that sort of frictionless, seamless journey from what we call the awareness phase on the front end all the way through to the loyalty phase on the end, communication plays a role throughout that. If the buyer is finding the information that they're looking for without effort, they can move seamlessly through that journey. So that's the definition, or my definition, if you will, of successful communication. It's from the customer's point of view. Why is it super important today, or even more important today? Everything's going digital. That's obviously already true in the business to consumer space. I focus more on the business to business space, and it's becoming increasingly true that things are going digital at a very rapid pace. So that traditional relationship between a buyer and the salesperson is essentially obsolete. The old ways that we used to think about messaging and how the sales process would go, the salesman was the custodian of all the information, and the buyer had to basically come and tease it out of them and negotiate a price. That's all gone by the wayside. With digital discovery and digital evaluation, as a seller, you don't know who those people are. You don't know who those prospects that are going to become customers are until very, very late in the process. And so when you first encounter them, you hammer them with your sales pitch and they're not actually ready to buy. That's a really quick way to lose them and their business. So we've got to be a lot more strategic, excuse me, about our messaging and how we convey it. The first step is, as I said earlier on, helping that buyer figure out what it is they're actually looking for, helping them frame and tell their own story. The second part is helping them to think about how they might solve that challenge, what a good outcome looks like, what a failure outcome might look like. then helping them to choose and purchase a solution, not necessarily your solution, a solution, because what you don't want to do is sell somebody something that they don't need. Actually helping people buy from your competition can be a really good thing. And so we're moving from a world of sales where it was all about the close. How many deals can we close this month, to always be helping. If we're helping our buyers move through that journey, we will de facto grow our sales. So I'm going to talk now very rapidly about the framework that we've been developing for helping companies to craft a superior message and to communicate it. I originally called it the messaging ABCs. It's actually A to F. So maybe the messaging A to Fs. I'm not sure what a good phrase for that is, but we'll go with the ABCs. And we'll start with A. So A stands for anchoring and authenticity. It's a bit lazy, but I'm going to roll out somebody else's quote. Simon Sinek, many of you will be familiar with him as a marketing and business guru, very successful author and speaker. He says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And because of that, whenever we're communicating with our customer, the reason we're doing it is almost as important about what we're doing, who we're doing it for, why us, and why now, although those mission and differentiators are obviously important as well. Humans, we're really good at sniffing it out when something isn't authentic. We sense when something doesn't add up. I see companies on their websites touting that they're working with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then I dig a couple of pages into the website and I go, I don't think that's actually true. Something doesn't quite add up here. The messaging, the words don't add up to the product. See a lot of companies at the moment kind of greenwashing what they do. They're claiming to be very sustainable, very environmentally conscious and focused. Then you buy a product from them and it shows up in some very obviously not sustainable, not recyclable packaging. And the message and the product and things just aren't adding up. We call that authenticity. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. What a lot of people don't realize on the business to business side is B2B purchasing is a very emotional thing. In fact, it's potentially even more emotional than a lot of business to consumer buying. So the decision is made based on feelings more than it's made on data. So just filling your website up with spec sheets and features isn't actually going to work. We've got to get to the emotional side of the buyer, and that's where we can win hearts and minds and business. So it's a subconscious rather than a conscious thing. And that's why this anchoring in purpose and authenticity plays a big role. All right, B is brand. I think most people, when you say brand, will think fonts, will think colors, will think images, will think website. I do also want to talk about the other side of brand, which is your brand personality. Your brand has a voice, it has a tone, it has a style. The voice is what would come to mind if you asked your customer, what do you think about first when you think about this company? And that shouldn't vary. No matter who you ask and when you ask them, it should be a consistent set of adjectives, if you like, that describe your business. The tone of your brand will change. So the tone of a blog post would be very different from a white paper, for example. Those two are going to sound different because they're conveying a different type of information in a different way. And then the style of your brand is kind of the polish that you put on that. It's the spelling and the grammar and the punctuation and the formatting. And importantly, for technical messaging, how much jargon do you use? Some companies can get away with using a lot of buzzwords and a lot of jargon if they're that kind of brand. Other companies can't. And so where you position yourself as a brand will be influenced by how much trade speak, how much jargon you use, and how consistent you are with that. I'm sure you've been to websites where you've read a piece of content from a company and gone, it just doesn't sound like the business that you say you are. An example for us recently was we had a client who acquired a business that was retrofitting compressed natural gas engines to gas-powered cars so they could be dual fuel. And the website that came with the business had clearly been written by some old school petrol head. It was very casual, it had a lot of good old wrenches and garages type language in it. And it actually needed to sound like it had environmental roots. This needed to be an environmental improvement story. So although we kept most of the content the same, just changing the style and the tone with which that website was written and presented, together with the images and the brand overall, just made a world of difference, obviously, to the sales of that business. This is probably the biggest one. We could talk a day, maybe 2 days, about C. It goes back to what Ellen was saying about the Build a Story brand by Donald Miller. Your message isn't about you. It's about your customer. They're the hero of your story. It should be written about them. It should be written for them, not just about you. Obviously, you've got to tell them who you are, but it really needs to be about your customer's success. just so many websites out there that you can immediately look at it and go, yep, it's about the company, it's about the company. Where's the stuff about me? What's in it for me? And as Ellen said, building a story brand, fantastic framework. Encourage everybody that hasn't read it, go get a copy, read it. It's a quick read. It's not difficult. Powerful framework. You also have to understand you're not selling to one person. So when we're doing business to business sales, I think this is even true of business to consumer. I think if you're trying to sell something to me as a consumer, you've probably got to try and convince my wife as well, because we make decisions together. Very much true at a business scale, right? You've got a customer, will have a buying committee. There'll be technical experts on there. There'll be financial gatekeepers on there, not just the champion that you happen to be talking to about your product. We use a technique called customer journey mapping to try and understand what each of those characters, each of those personas is looking for. What information are they trying to find? Where are they going to try to find it? Your goal is to meet those prospects on that channel with the information that's going to be relevant and helpful to them. And you also need to remember that different types of content are appropriate at different stages in that buyer's journey. So if they're in the awareness phase, they want to see a different kind of content and a different content format even, compared to evaluation, selection, implementation, and loyalty. Whizzing along here, I warned you we were going to go quickly through a lot of stuff. D is development and delivery. A lot of the companies that we work with are relatively small. If you've got a new technology, you might well be a startup, smaller company like Ellen's. And creating all of that content can seem like an incredible mountain. Leadership teams will quickly balk at that and say, who the heck's going to do all of that? We've got a small team, they're all very busy. It doesn't have to be that onerous, it doesn't have to be that complicated. A lot of companies already have a lot of useful information kicking around the organization. They just don't really know where it is. I think of it like a disorganized pantry. You want to make dinner, but you don't really know what ingredients you've got. Organize the pantry, figure out what you've got, find some simple recipes for combining those things into digestible content, and then put it out there. You also need clear roles. Who's going to own the strategy? Who's going to actually create the content? Who's going to edit it? Will you need a digital marketing specialist who's going to help put things out onto specific channels? And you can't forget about the analytics. So who's going to look at the data that's coming back from that content to see what's working, what's not, where you should be doubling down. I think the same person can obviously play multiple of those roles, especially at a small company, but you will need specialists. There's going to be people like Dawn doing graphic design type work. You might need a videographer if you're going to make good quality video. So, you'll need to think about who's the team. It takes a village, but you want to publish consistently. I think one of the things that companies underestimate is how important it is to be regular with content delivery, because that helps build search authority. The search algorithms like to see that. They see regular content appearing on your channels. That's going to lift you up the search engine results. That's going to get you more visibility. So figure out how much content your team can realistically produce, and then get organized around it and make sure you're tracking its production and getting it out there on a regular basis. Quality beats quantity any day of the week, but consistency is also really important. All right, almost done. Evaluation and evolution, even with a basic set of websites and social media channels, you've got to have analytics, use multiple tools to look at them, dashboards. It's all very well to measure traffic, but traffic doesn't necessarily mean conversions. So you've got to monitor how those are converting into actual value, things like customer lifetime value. We have disposable content that it's good for a month, but then it's gone. That's about where we're going to be speaking at the next conference, that kind of stuff. Look for evergreen content that keeps people coming back to your website, things that you can then renew and refresh, and that will really boost search engine rankings. You've always got competing goals. You're trying to please your audience, but you're trying to please the algorithm. You've got to master the algorithms. Otherwise, you'll just constantly be struggling to get seen. And then in general, obviously, the more engagement a piece of content gets, the more likely it is to get rewarded by the search engines. And so focusing on what's working and doubling down on that. F is for flying along and getting to the last letter, following through. The biggest mistake we see with companies with their marketing strategy is they don't follow through on it. They fail to invest for the long term. You're not going to get anywhere with just a handful of blog posts. It takes 6, 9, 12 months of consistent content marketing to see big results. It's also tempting to try and be on every channel at once. That's impossible, especially with a small team. Use the customer journey mapping, things like that, to figure out the most important channels, get great at 1 or 2 of them, and then land and expand from there. You've got to recognize that not everybody you encounter is going to be ready to buy. So lead nurturing is really important. That means building a relationship, a meaningful relationship with that prospect, continuing to give them relevant, helpful content as they move through their journey. You'd be surprised how many companies don't do lead nurturing, but the ones that do, The research says they generate 50% more sales-ready leads at a third less the cost. So lead nurturing, absolutely worth the time and investment you put into it once you've got the content out there. That's my framework. That's A through F. I will call it quits there and let Dawn take over.
Hello, everybody. Let me get my screen going here. All right. I'm Dawn Putney. My company's Toolbox Creative. We're in Fort Collins, and like Ellen said, we're a B2B branding firm that works specifically with technology companies. Our real passion behind that is helping advance women in technology. So that's really where we start to get excited about what we do. Because we work in additive manufacturing, clean tech, and ag tech, it tends to be pretty male-dominated industries, but we're making progress all the time. So we really specialize in telling those brand stories through graphics and images. So I always think that's a lot of fun because we get to really illustrate what that looks like. It can take a lot of work to figure out how to illustrate your tech. It's no small task to try to get you there. So this is one of my favorite. This has been out there for a while, but I just discovered it a while ago. So I like to think of it as your tech being this big pile of lots of fun stuff. And it's great. We could talk about that for hours, like Matt said, but really, it's about narrowing this down. So then there's improvement on it, right? This is better. It looks like a bar chart, but it's still the facts. What really starts to happen is when you can tell your tech story. And that's when your tech is visualized. This is such a great example of taking it from a pile of information to some data to really telling the story. It gives you all the feels, right? It's about beauty and elegance and organized ideas in business. This is from a design shop. I think they're out of Australia called Hot Butter Studio. It's just one of my favorite examples. It's about as basic as you can get when it comes to telling your brand story. But we really base it all on design thinking. If you're here in Colorado, I'm sure you've probably heard of IDEO. If you Google IDEO's design kit, that is free. They have all kinds of great free content out there. A lot of it is based on education. A lot of it is based on product design. So check that out. But what design thinking does for our clients who tend to be a lot of engineers, I don't have an engineering background. We're marketing folks, but we really have worked with engineers for so long that we're very well versed in trying to take these really complex technology ideas and turning them into graphics and stories that people can understand pretty quickly. So you're really thinking about the needs of the people. You're going to hear that over and over from us. The possibilities of your technology, not exactly what your technology does, but what are the possibilities of that technology and how it's going to affect those people. And then the requirements for business success. So you're looking at a very specific marketing challenge. Typically when you're going to do an illustration like this, or we call them visualizations, they're 2D prototypes. There's all kinds of names for them out there. You're really thinking about how to expand the understanding of the marketplace and the landscape. How can we get people to understand your tech pretty quickly without going through a 70-page slide deck with all of your, basically a demo of your software or your product in there. How you're going to engage. We really encourage everybody to talk to your audience. That interview process is so important. You get the best information when you ask people, not necessarily asking them what they want, because they don't know what they want until they see the thing that's right for them, but listening to what they are in need of in their business to really take their business to the next level. Then we talked about that prototyping solutions and really just illustrating how your brand can be a roadmap that guides the way. So this is one of the tools. It really starts with ugly. As much as we love creating these beautiful visualizations, it goes back to the worksheets that we use to start the process. And I know you can't read this, but this is available. I'll put the link in the chat if anybody wants this. This is a PDF that you can download and type in the blanks. We tend to work with teams of buyers. So whether that's the folks who are using the technology or the person who's writing the check, there's a whole big audience there. A lot of the times we find that not everybody's on the same page when we're having those conversations. So using this tool with our clients, this is an outward facing tool that we use to work with our clients that says, okay, are we all on the same page? Who's using this product? What are they using it for? What's in their heart? What's in their minds? What are they thinking about? What are your core competencies? It's a really great way to make sure that everybody's in alignment. So halfway through the process, somebody doesn't come in and say, oh, this is all, that's the exact opposite of what we wanted. So this can get really messy. This is an example directly out of one of our most recent projects. It turned into actually an 8-page document These were academics who were looking to illustrate the concept of change theory. So we just kept getting email after email with all these academic kind of ugly diagrams that nobody really could understand. So we needed to use this tool to organize everything that we were getting from the clients. So we could say, okay, we're understanding what you're telling us. Let's refer back to this document. And then it really goes to a pretty rough sketch. Before we ever start illustrating something in a final form, we're really just using whiteboards, pens, paper, markers to think through how this looks. This sketch is after about 6 hours of meetings with clients. So you can see, you can see it takes a lot of work to get to that process. A lot of times what we get, either we don't have anything that we start working with, or we'll get something like you see on the screen here, right? There's not a whole lot of emotion that is generated from this graphic. It's got the facts in there, and it really doesn't matter what it's illustrating. For me, this is all about, well, what does this make me feel? And when I look at this, it's like, well, everything goes to the right. I don't know that that makes me feel anything, but I understand that. But there's not a whole lot of warm, fuzzy or understanding in there. And more interestingly, the real guts of this illustration is the smallest type in the middle. And that tends to be what happens when you've got a diagram that you haven't thought through it from design thinking. There's a quote out there. I have to look up the reference. I should have done that before this call, but it says, in physics, beauty does not automatically ensure truth, but it helps. And I think that's really true in marketing and trying to get your story across. When aesthetics are so important, so this is the final product from all of those sketches and all of that information. This was the final. Now, this is still pretty complex. A lot of what we do is really complex tech. So it does take some walking through videos to animate this and turn it into something that you can walk people through step by step is even better. This needed to be submitted to a paper that was being sent out to clients. So really just a flat image of it is what we could do. Oops, where am I? Oh, okay, my screen is sharing again now. Sorry, I got a message that my screen went away for a minute. So that's really a great opportunity or a great example of how you can make things beautiful and start eliciting some emotions from that. Audiences, we're going to talk, you've heard us all talk about that as well. We're also a B2B agency. When we're talking about audiences, we actually think of it from 3 tiers, right? So as a small company or a startup company, the Dave Techs here in the small corner, you're taking on some pretty big corporations that probably have a marketing budget that is bigger than your whole budget for the year. So we really look at, okay, who are we trying to target with this? You need one big story that is attractive to everybody. But then from another perspective, you need to fine tune that story for each user along that buying journey. So the influencer tends to be the technical person who's using the product, has a problem, needs to figure out how they can solve their problem. They see it, they read a white paper, they watch a video, they read something online, they take that up the chain to the next person. Depends on the company, but sometimes that's an R&D department, sometimes that's procurement. It really depends who the person in the middle there who's going to look at your product. And as startups, this is really important because they have to know and trust that you can deliver on what you're promising. There's a reason the big companies stay big companies, and that's because they have reputations and they can deliver the product on time. Well, maybe not on time, but they can get the product done. And then there's the person who writes the check, and that's the decider. So we really look at that from the perspective of why is that so important? Because if you're trying to take on a big guy, they have this maybe outer core of available customers who are looking for something new. They're frustrated with us out there in the market. They're willing to take a chance with a smaller company or look at a smaller company. And that's really that outer ring of available customers. It moves, the closer you get to the big company, the harder it is to get those folks. But that's really where we try to focus our clients, is on who's available, who's willing to try something different, and how are we going to speak to them. So one of the opportunities there is, again, thinking about what really matters. This is about emotions. This is about the beauty in design. So what we look for when we're thinking about the communications of the product is the benefit versus the feature. 9 times out of 10, when we talk to a new client, they show me a deck that's all features of the product and really doesn't get to any of the emotion for that client. So, and a lot of times there's too much information in there, right? So this is about editing as well. This is another great example of way too much information. Now, you could probably figure out how to get around New York with this map, but it really stresses me out just to look at that. So maybe you could get around New York with this. That same concept, right? Here's a subway map of New York, Brooklyn, Bronx, and even parts of Jersey. So much simpler, so beautiful, so elegant. This was made by a French mapping company. Still gets you the information you need. But what I love about this so much is that it gives me hope. It makes me believe that I can get around New York City. Having an iPhone doesn't hurt anymore. But this is really about, I could see myself out here, in the LaGuardia, wherever that is on this map, and finding myself downtown by getting on a blue line and a brown line, and I'm there. Really elegant, really beautiful. You could even figure out how to get to Staten Island if you wanted to. So what that does is it just shifts me from this concept of being really stressed out about trying to figure out how to get around New York with this really crazy map to, oh, easy, get on this train, get on that train, we're there, all with one simple graphic. So that gets to that emotional piece, right? So that's about a human connection. It's about evoking those really positive emotions. It's about positive memories. It's about pleasurable interactions. It's about making people imagine the future state, right? That's what happens when I look at that map. I can see myself getting to the next point. And then, of course, above all, that emotions matter. So some of the things that we look at when we're considering what's appropriate to include in this type of explainer visualization is positivity, right? Color, language, imagery. Surprise is great. You'd be surprised how few tech companies use that element of surprise. You know it when you see it because it's done so rarely, and when it's there, it tends to be done really well. Uniqueness is really important. You can go to, especially with startups, you can go to a website, go to a lot of startup websites, and we're all bootstrapping or looking for VC money and trying to do it ourselves. So there's a lot of startup websites out there that look like you're doing it yourself. That can be a challenge too, right? So what makes you unique? What can you do to stand apart and attract the audience with good design? Folks know good design whether they recognize it or not. I always use the example of, Target versus Walmart, right? You walk into Target, it's beautiful, things are designed well, there's gorgeous signage everywhere. You're in there, you might buy, I always said for me, it was $120 worth of stuff that I didn't need. Walmart, I'm in and out, I buy the one thing I need, and you're out the door. So there's really that piece of attraction, whether people realize they understand good design or not, is there. And then, of course, responding to your audience and letting them see themselves, right? There's a piece of recognizing yourself in the future state that's really important. This is actually a little bit of our work that we did for a 3D printing company that works in the world of jewelry. Again, they tend to be pretty complex because these are tools that a sales team is either taking out when they're meeting with a customer or meeting with them online and trying to show them a little bit of everything. So this one in particular not only gets into showing the tech, this is a very lower tech audience, so a lot more creative audience who's looking to do some high tech stuff. So we did a style of illustration that was really simple and really elegant. But what I love about this is if you dig a little bit deeper on this, what we're looking for is that the audience can picture themselves in this, and then can picture their dreams in this. We show them a little bit of the product, but even better yet, we talk about the benefits of this product. So when a customer looks at this and says, oh, wow, 95% fewer production errors, tell me more. We start to get illicit emotions right away when we show something like this. This one we really consider kind of a sophisticated 2D prototype. So it's thinking about how to tell the story of this one was a software that's connected to a hardware 3D printing company to help identify the audience, illustrate their experience, and really the benefits of the technology over showing exactly what it is, but then tell them the story of how this fits into their business model, right? A stat like 95% fewer production errors tends to be a pretty good sales tool when you're working with a client, a technical client like this. And what really that gets back to for us is beauty in business, right? I love this quote from Vincent McNabb about beauty being the radiance of truth and the fragrance of goodness. That gets back to aesthetic value, and it gets back to the science behind the fact that beauty is a powerful force in all forms of creative work, or all forms of work, really. It doesn't just have to be creative work. People perceive attractive design, attractive anything, as being in higher demand, that is probably going to cost a little bit more to comparable objects, and that there's really an aesthetic component to it. There's a value of judgment when you're talking about beauty and design. So it's, what that appearance looks like elicits an emotional response. it's instantaneously. I think the stats on a website now are, less than a second and a half. People make a decision when they land on your homepage about whether they're going to stick around or not, based purely on what it looks like. The words are good, but that image is really going to be the first thing that makes people decide to stay or go. And what's really interesting about that is that all ties back to the science of nature. As human beings, nature is beautiful. When you're out there in the world and you're looking around, we're just predestined to appreciate the beauty of nature. And that gets back to this bigger concept of aesthetic value and radiance and truth and what that all looks like. So really that's where good design and good design thinking for the right audience comes into play. It's all about what people are already fine-tuned to look for and giving them more of what they want. So we believe in nature and we believe in the beauty of nature. And that's why that argument that beautiful is really perceived to be true. It's not always true, but there's definitely something to be said for the fact that that's what gets people to understand. And how you get there is really it's a journey along the way, right? This is actually a photograph from 10 years ago in a lab here at CSU with a product that a client was trying to develop, and it would take them an hour and a half to explain their battery technology. We went to the lab, we worked with the scientists in the lab for them to explain to us what it is that this tech was trying to do. They whiteboarded it out. What that final image ended up being, they have a product, but it's really hard to show the inner workings of this battery without illustrating it. So this is the money shot in this illustration. Really, it's the center right, the purple and orange image. That's how the technology works. You can't show that in a video. You can't show that in a final product. They ended up using this as they lovingly called it the placemat at Prieto Better. They would take this one illustration out to investor conversations, to presentations that they do, whether they're pitching or they're out talking to potential partners and clients. This one visualization landed them to date about $9.5 million in funding. And it's really because it went from trying to explain a really complex tech without having to read an academic white paper into showing what this technology does. So that takes us back around full circle to design thinking, right? So it's about audience experiences, benefits, tech, and the business model, which really gets us back to the truth of how these visualizations work as well as they do. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dawn and Matt. And just once again, a reminder to please put in some questions. We have gotten a few from the audience so far, and there are certainly some that I would like to ask you guys as well. But yeah, starting out with one about what role does public tech documentation play in telling your technical story? What are some best practices for ensuring your documentation aligns with your brand? So I think this is a good question that I think both of you can answer. Dawn, I think it kind of looks similar to, what you showed with that battery example. I mean, how do you make sure you're telling a good story, but you're also staying true to the technical correctness and technical content?
Well, and that's a great question, because honestly, that's typically where we see marketing and technologists butt heads, especially when we're talking to academics and scientists, right? So it's like, but that's not exactly what it does. It's like, we're not going to make anything up, but we need to show what happens without it being exactly right. There's plenty of false advertising, and that's where Matt's point on authenticity is so critical, right? So it's like, yes, but it comes down to really creative editing. You don't have to tell everything this does, but you want to be pretty true to, well, what are people going to understand? So one, it's talking to the customers, and two, start take it out there and take it for a test run. See what kind of questions you get. So when you start showing a graphic like that battery graphic, when you see heads, I always say, listen for the aha moment. When people start nodding, when you're walking them through that thing, listen to that and do more of that. If they have a lot of questions, then you go back and refine it, because if they're not understanding it, then, and that's okay, because right, you're doing a 2D prototype. That's easy enough to go back and edit versus building out something that people might not understand and trying to take it from there. So it's I wouldn't say it's a fine line, but I would say as being able to move from that super reality to benefits versus the features of the product, that gives you a little bit more leeway in what to talk about there.
Matt, do you want to elaborate on that question as well?
I'm not sure I'd elaborate. It was a pretty healthy answer there from Dawn. But I would say, you know, what's the best practice of aligning your documentation with your brand? Align it with your brand. Actually take the time to do it. I think a lot of people view marketing separate from technical documentation. Bring the two together. Make sure that the language that's in the technical documentation has a similar style that you've put out, you know, with the rest of your brand. Make sure the brand elements are on there, that it's consistent, so someone can recognize that technical document belongs with this brand, belongs with this company. And yeah, customer focus. What does the customer actually want to see? I think we chuck huge, you know, amounts of data and measurements and sizes and whatever it is that goes into some of this stuff, and the customer never looks at it. So I do agree with Dawn. Test it with the customer and say, is this what you're looking for? And then, yeah, apply the brand to it. I think that's the single biggest best practice. A lot of companies, they're coming from two different places. They never get brought together to one brand point, so they don't look right.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that this is all an iterative process, right? Like you may not get it right the first time, but if you're getting good positive feedback from your customers, then you know you're heading in the right direction and you can keep iterating on it.
Well,
And
that's
don't be
why we
afraid
like
to
to
write
start.
technical documentation in a non-technical voice. You know, I think if you are the kind of brand that's trying to be the friendly brand, the not so geeky brand, the not very super technical brand, don't then follow that up with technical information that's, you know, impossible to digest. Simplify it for your audience, make it consistent with the voice you've used across the other parts of your brand.
Well, and there's white papers that go along with that illustration too, right? Like you can give the tech stuff to the techie people. That's great. They want to read the tech specs. But I think the other piece of that, I think that is just so important, is why we like to start in a 2D illustration is videos are great, but they're more expensive too, right? So I love the first draft of it being that illustration style. You can test it, see what's happening a little bit. And then when you do get some proof of concept, then take it to that animation or illustration or video. So that's because, you know, I mean, it's costs more to animate it. So it's a good test run.
Great. So another question that we had was, who's doing it really well? Like, what are some really good examples of a product or service that's super complex, but they are just killing it with their content and storytelling? Don showed a few examples. Matt, you referenced Simon Sinek's TED Talk, which I'm actually going to drop in the chat here, because that the concept of telling people why you do it, not just what you do, that I think he shares some good examples in there as well. Any other kind of companies or people that you can point to that are doing things really well?
You know, my first reaction to a question that says a business that's super complex is you can't message a super complex business very effectively. You've got to simplify it down to something that the customer can understand. But there are certainly businesses out there that do very technical things, or have a wide-ranging product that's got a lot of a lot of things you could talk about, and you need to get the message simple down to one clear narrative. I think about on the big end companies, obviously Apple is famous for it. HubSpot does a great job of a very complex software platform. It's got features up the gazoo for all sorts of parts of your company. Now they're in the marketing space, so they ought to be doing marketing well. One that I like that's a bit more technical is called Markforged. I'll type it in the chat here in a second. Markforged does 3D printing. They have done a fantastic job, I think, about explaining 3D printing, communicating the value of it, and how you can benefit from it as a customer. Some very visual communication as well as written. But I'll stick that in the chat.
Yeah, and honestly, the one that comes to mind for me is Tesla, since we're talking about batteries and right, not the car side of it, but talk about a brand, right? Like, and then that they barely even talk about the tech when it comes to that. And it's such a tech-based company. We tend to look at it more from the utility side and powering a house versus powering a car. If you get to their website, there's some of that information there, but first they're telling the story of how battery power can save the world, and then they're getting into the technical side of it. I think that's just a great example of you know, even with some of the crazy that happens in their in Elon Musk's personal life and some of the social media stuff, it's still a tech that people, they know the brand, they understand that it's batteries and battery powered world. And I think there's just a whole lot of good happening there too.
Yeah, good examples. I do want to follow up on that question and say, what are some, and you don't have to name names, we can protect the innocent if you don't want to name any names, but what are some examples where you've seen storytelling fall flat or maybe just kind of missing the mark on the message?
For me, it goes back to just I literally saw a 240-page deck from a software company who had a platform, enterprise platform, let's just call it that, for route accounting. And the first time they were explaining it to us to help them with the branding, and it took 2.5 hours for them to walk a client through that. It was basically a demo. It's just like, man, that's holding people hostage, right? Like 2.5 hours in a first biz dev meeting is painful. And that's really where our light bulb started going off and saying, you got to be able to do this quick, in a quick image, in a quick message to help people understand first and foremost why they should care. And then once you have them hooked, sure, you can show them a demo. But no, I tell people 12 pages. You should be able to do your pitch in 12 slides. And everybody falls over when I say that, but you really should be able to if you're doing it well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a vast population of companies that are underperforming versus probably a small elite group that are really getting it right. I would say any website I go to where before I scroll down, so I'm above the fold, as we call it on that first screen, if I can't tell what's in it for me and whether I should scroll, you've lost me. So messaging starts with that first impactful statement about the customer, not about I don't care what the company is or how long it's been in business or how wonderful it is. Does this company have something that I want to learn more about that's relevant to the challenge that I'm trying to solve? So I think there's just, countless companies that with a very small tweak to the way the message is being conveyed can go from mediocre to really quite good.
Great.
Exum Instruments, awesome.
Oh yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that plug.
Go.
Yeah, no, we have a great video on our website. I will give a plug to Motion Graphics, who's they focus more on the 3D side of things, but they did a pretty good job of explaining our highly technical tech in a simple, beautiful manner, I would say. Yeah, so we only have a few minutes left, so I'd love to see Dawn and Matt if you have any just final summarizing points or things that you didn't get a chance to say or that no one asked you about. How would you like to wrap us up here?
Ladies first.
Okay, thank you. Really for me, it's that I'm just a big design thinking junkie, and having IDEO here in Colorado has just been a gift and another example of marketing done well, right? They give away so much of their knowledge. So I would just tell folks, if you haven't read much up on it, do that. My other favorite book that I should have included is Designing for Growth. There's a lot in here. If you're, especially when you're a startup trying to figure out some of that stuff, just do a little bit of thinking about that. IDEO actually has online classes that are relatively inexpensive and a lot of fun that have a peer-to-peer element to it. It's that human-centered design, I think, is so much about what drives what we do. And we've just seen it over and over that it works for our clients as well. Matt?
Yeah, I would say invest the time and effort in the messaging that it deserves. I think we've seen historically, a company is starting to grow. The first big hire in that business development is a senior salesperson that's got, well, in the old days, a Rolodex, these days, a long list of contacts that they can reach out to and go sell. And marketing, the first hire is, hey, can the person that mans the front desk also do a little bit of social media for us? And you start very junior and work up. And I think those two roles are almost reversing. They're certainly reaching parity where getting the messaging right, figuring out the customer, doing the customer analysis, figuring out what they want to hear from you, not just pushing what you want to tell them. And so I think investing early and more in the messaging and the marketing side and allowing that then to support sales rather than this kind of minimal marketing budget early is really going to help a lot of companies get their message out more effectively.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much again for your time. And are you open to having some of these audience attendees reach out to you on social media or your websites to chat more if they want some more specific questions answered?
Most definitely.
Awesome.
Yep, absolutely. I put a
my,
link to that sketch pad in the chat. If anybody who wants that, absolutely grab it. Otherwise, just reach out. You can find us.
I put my email address in there. I know that's always scary, but you're welcome. Reach out. And there's a couple more questions in the Q&A. I'm going to try and answer those by typing before we get shut down here. So hopefully we can get to them.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you guys again. And thanks to all our attendees.
Thank you for leading us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Matt.